The first running back sleeper off the board should be Ryan Mathews of the San Diego Chargers. Mathews was the 12th pick of the 2010 NFL Draft and was the nation's leading rusher at 150.7 yards per game at Fresno State last year, along with 19 touchdowns. He is listed as the number one running back on the depth chart for the Chargers under Norv Turner and will share carries with Darren Sproles, but Sproles is better suited as a change-of-pace running back and receiver out of the backfield. Mathews will get goal line work and should be considered a low-end number 2 fantasy running back worth mid-round pick in seasonal leagues. Mathews may be a rookie, but I have a feeling he will be a solid, if not surprisingly good pick. I would not hesitate to pick Mathews as my number 2 back, but might falter at taking him first go because of the Sproles factor. We know two things. Mathews will play, and San Diego will have to run the ball effectively to open the passing game. Mathews is 220 pounds, yet runs a 4.37 40, is a willing receiver and decent blocker and can break tackles. He isn't a burner by any means. Think Matt Forte of the Bears, and you probably have a good idea of his skills. But behind a pretty solid offensive line and alongside one of the NFL's most dangerous passing attacks, Mathews looks like a safe bet to run over 1,000 yards this season and score high, single-digit touchdowns. The next sleeper off the board should be Sean Green of the New York Jets. This season, Green is one of those guys who will either get drafted way too early or way too late. When the Jets released Thomas Jones, Green inherited a starting job behind the league's best offensive line and most run-oriented game plan. He flashed good ability during the 2009 regular season, carrying the ball 108 times for 540 yards and a pair of touchdowns. In 2 postseason games, Green carried the ball 54 times for 304 yards and a pair of touchdowns. However, Sean is prone to injuries. In college, he had serious injury issues and battled ankle and rib problems throughout his rookie year, so building your team around him is no sure thing. He is a powerful back who, when given an opportunity to perform, can put up big numbers. There is no doubt in my mind that Green can be a top 10 back this season. The only question mark for me is durability, but that's something we have to ask ourselves about with every player. I see no reason why Green shouldn't finish the season with 1,300 yards and double-digit touchdowns. The next sleeper off the board is Jamal Charles of the Kansas City Chiefs. A 2009 super sleeper on NFL.com, Charles made a real name for himself in all fantasy leagues. After taking over the top spot on the depth chart, he rushed for 100-plus yards 5 times and scored at least 1 touchdown in all but 2 of his starts. That was pretty much a rushing touchdown a game for Jamal, along with 111.5 yards per game. Charles also finished the season on a high note, leading all running backs in fantasy points over the final 4 weeks. He is now the unquestioned starter in Kansas City. While the addition of Thomas Jones hurts his value, Charles is still a low-end number 1 fantasy back in all leagues. Jamal is young, and if the Chiefs are going to improve on their 4-12 record, he will need to be an intricate part of their offense. If you have a chance to draft Jamal in the early rounds, then get it done. Charles' numbers this season will make fantasy owners very happy. Expect Charles to run for nearly 1,200 yards and score 8 touchdowns, along with 400 receiving yards and a score. The next sleeper off the board is Jahvid Best of the Detroit Lions. Best was the 30th pick of the 2010 NFL Draft. He is an explosive running back out of California with real upside at the pro level. At Cali, Best ran for 2,668 yards, caught 62 passes, and scored 35 total touchdowns. He is expected to fill in for Kevin Smith as he recovers from major knee surgery. Best has the potential to be a solid fantasy option entering the season, as Smith might not be ready for week 1 of the season, which could then make Best the starter for the Lions. He will likely share carries with Smith once he returns. Best has plenty of value in keeper leagues with an early to mid-round selection. He figures to get plenty of work, especially if Kevin Smith isn't 100% back from reconstructive knee surgery in time for week 1. There is some concern about the lack of durability he showed at the collegiate level, but his potential makes him an intriguing fantasy option. Best is the most talented runner in Motown and is worth a low middle-round pick. Expect Jahvid to run for almost 1,000 yards and score 8 touchdowns, along with 250 receiving yards and 2 scores. The next sleeper off the board is LeSean McCoy of the Philadelphia Eagles. When the Eagles released veteran Brian Westbrook in the offseason, McCoy's fantasy value increased dramatically. He showed potential as a rookie when he posted nearly 1,000 yards from scrimmage despite starting only 4 games. In 2009, he rushed for 637 yards and scored 4 touchdowns, along with 40 catches for 308 yards. McCoy did average 4.54 yards per attempt in 3 games where he received at least 17 carries. LeSean showed he could handle the starting job last year with 4 games with double digits in fantasy points in the first 5 games after Westbrook first got hurt. McCoy has obvious statistical upside and is nearly a lock to post 50-plus catches and more than 1,200 yards from scrimmage in the Eagles' pass-heavy attack. A viable number 2 fantasy back with added value in leagues that award points for receptions, McCoy is worth a look between rounds 2 and 4. There is some downside to McCoy since Mike Bell was added to the roster, and Leonard Weaver will also get carries. But McCoy will get the majority of touches for the Eagles and has plenty of upside. Expected to run for 900 yards and score 8 touchdowns along with 450 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. The next sleeper off the board is Felix Jones of the Dallas Cowboys. Jones is a true fantasy sleeper for 2010. He showed a lot of upside late last season and in the playoffs, surpassing Marion Barber as the Cowboys' most effective running back. As a result, Jones saw his average carries rise from 6.7 per game from weeks 1 through 13 to 13.2 from week 14 through the end of the postseason. Also, in that span, he had 4 runs of 40 yards or longer. That's a telling statistic, and one that could eventually mean a starting role. If that happens, Jones would move ahead of Barber in terms of fantasy value. If you count Dallas' 2 playoff games last year, Jones ran for 902 yards on just 146 carries last season. If he can get 200 or so carries, as many of the team's beat writers suspect, Jones could put up some huge numbers in 2010. He is a solid number 2 running back in fantasy. While Jones tends to get injured, his potential makes him worth a middle round selection. Expect Felix to run for 1,000 yards and score 8 touchdowns along with 150 receiving yards. The next sleeper off the board is Ben Tate of the Houston Texans. Tate was selected 58th overall in the second round of the 2010 NFL Draft. A bruising back out of Auburn, Tate figures to play a prominent role in the backfield for Texans head coach Gary Kubiak. He's 220 pounds and ran a freakish 4.43 40 at the combine while dominating the bench press. Tate is a cutback runner with the skills to play all 3 downs, so he has a chance to emerge atop the team's depth chart. The downside is that despite his abilities, he won't be a true featured back. Houston will continue to use Steve Slayton and Arian Foster in some sets. That limits Tate's immediate value to possible flex starter in most leagues. With a lot of work ahead his way, including at the goal line, Tate is a good-looking number 3 fantasy running back with a lot of upside to become a number 2 option. Owners might reach for him in drafts, but he could be worth it. Peg him for a pick between rounds 5 and 6 in seasonal drafts right now, but that could change come August. Expect Tate to run for 950 yards and score high single-digit touchdowns along with 100 receiving yards. The next sleeper off the board is C.J. Spiller of the Buffalo Bills. Spiller was selected 9th overall in the 2010 NFL Draft. C.J. is extremely talented and is one of 2 players in college football history with 3,000 rushing yards, 1,500 kickoff return yards, 1,000 receiving yards, and 500 punt return yards. Last year, he paced Clemson with 1,212 yards and 12 scores on 216 carries, adding 503 yards with 4 touchdowns on 36 catches. But with a terrible offense around him, he's going to attract plenty of defensive attention. Spiller was considered the most explosive running back in the 2010 rookie class, and he'd be ranked higher if he didn't project to be a committee runner in Buffalo. The Bills would continue to use Fred Jackson as their early down runner, and Marshawn Lynch is also expected in the backfield. That limits Spiller's statistical potential. A middle round pick in fantasy leagues, Spiller has flex starter potential. Expect him to run for 800 yards this season and score 5 touchdowns along with 300 receiving yards and 2 scores. The next sleeper off the board is Montario Hardesty of the Cleveland Browns. The Browns trade up to select Hardesty, a physical runner with outstanding speed, in the second round of the 2010 NFL Draft. In his career at Tennessee, Hardesty ran for 2,361 yards and scored 26 touchdowns. But it was 2009 which really added value to the Jamal Lewis clone, who rushed for 1,345 yards and 13 touchdowns as a senior. Montario is young and healthy and full of potential. He's a tremendous cutback runner and a great fit for the team's ground attack. In fact, Hardesty figures to get plenty of carries in the backfield committee with Jerome Harrison, and he has sleeper appeal in an offense that will lean on the run. The Tennessee product is a low to middle round pick in seasonal leagues. If he unseats Harrison as the starter during training camp, Hardesty would have even more value in all drafts. Expect him to run for 900 yards and score 7 touchdowns, along with 80 receiving yards and a score. The last sleeper off the board is Toby Gerhart of the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings took the Stanford running back in the second round of the NFL Draft, giving them a suitable second running option behind starter Adrian Peterson. Gerhart is expected to replace Chester Taylor as the second back in the Vikings offense. He ran for nearly 1,900 yards and scored 27 touchdowns in his final season at Stanford. Gerhart is a big, powerful ball carrier that has just enough speed to be a threat. He runs with a good pad level and consistently breaks through first contact and gets a lot of his yards after initial contact. Toby seems to get stronger as the game wears on. He knows how to follow his blockers and is patient as he waits for the hole to open up. He's an effective receiver out of the backfield, and while he's not apt to be used as a downfield threat, he can move the chains in the short to intermediate passing game. Expect Gerhart to run for 450 yards and score 5 touchdowns along with 50 receiving yards in a score.